Okay, so we use the word tackling, not to necessarily be a negative connotation, but sometimes you do feel like, um, there's some barriers to overcome, but kind of being on this end, this side of the accreditation process, which we recently were granted accreditation. And so, and it was a long process and there were many obstacles, but just to encourage you that it is doable. And when, but there's some things that we've kind of learned along the way that we wanted to share with you. So that's what we'll do. So tackling the outcomes assessment process is what we're looking at.
So, like Ashley said, we have definitely learned some things along the way. And one of the things when we talked about this, like what should you do before you start this outcomes assessment process? And we would have to heavily agree that you need to form a collaborative team. Try to find members who will bring in, different aspects to the team. You might have someone who is very strong in that assessment side of things, and possibly knowing the idea of closing the loop, as Cosmo likes to put that. And I think that was one of the things we learned through the process. It really was just Ashley and I, and we did have a few other additional people who helped throughout the process, but we could have used probably a bigger team possibly. And so another idea is to consult plans from other programs. I mean, I think we always like to say you don't need to recreate the wheel, but it's a good idea to see what other programs are doing, to kind of give you some guidance and moving forward with your own. And not that you change yours to adapt to theirs, but you can look and say, well, this is what we're already doing, and this is kind of how they formatted it. Another idea is to find a mentor. Of course, we recently were able to have a mentor help us with sort of restructuring our outcomes assessment plan, but maybe finding a mentor to begin with to help guide you through this process would be a really big help for your program. And then, of course, developing a plan, like starting from scratch and moving forward. And what's that plan going to be as you move forward?
Plan of action, timelines, that would be very helpful. Before we move on, do any of you, one of the things we wanted to know is from our participants is where you stand in the process in terms of where you are. See, we have a few attendees, not to put anybody on the spot.
You can always put it in the chat too.
Yeah, feel free to put it in the chat. But, just having like a very organized system for dates and stuff would be very helpful. Time management is a huge component of writing the outcomes assessment. That's probably half the battle is the time management aspect.
Okay. So your program's already accredited, going through information.
Okay, well, wonderful. So we have programs that have been going through this. So one of the things, and as you know, is it progress to the next screen? There we go. Is the development of strategic priorities. And when we started this process, we did not have a college strategic plan. And so we were kind of creating this at our department level and our program level. And so that was challenging. I have since had the opportunity to serve on our college plan for creating the strategic priorities for the college. And I learned so much for that process that it's like, wow, this would be great for somebody starting out, or like a piece of advice to give those that are going through just starting the process is conducting focus groups, getting information from students in the sport management program, certainly alumni of your program, consulting other faculty and external stakeholders like those people that you do internships with, other people in the community that would be relevant for helping adding to your sport management program. And it really gives an opportunity to provide rich information and to develop themes that really go into making those strategic priorities. So we're kind of looking at it from the back end, but moving, if we were to start this process over again, and if if I could give a piece of advice to somebody, certainly just starting, I would recommend this process because it was very thorough and very effective at making priorities. Because when you think about it, your whole foundation of your program are your strategic priorities. And so, would anyone else like to share? Heather, do you have any insights? Feel free at any time to say anything, or, if you don't understand or something like that.
Okay, we just were reading your message about 2 commissioners and 4 accredited programs and 1 exploring. Okay.
Wonderful.
So part of the focus group, in addition to adding to what Ashley was saying with the external stakeholders, we had an advisory board early on, but had not really met with them frequently. And one of the things that we're learning through this process is that the advisory board can be such a great tool to help you realize what those outcomes are you're trying to see and get out of your students and your program. And so I think the advisory board has been one of the huge benefits to our program in allowing us to see what some of those ultimate, goals are that we'd like to see in those outcomes. But it definitely was a challenge, I'd say the least, that because our college did not have a strategic plan in place, that was a challenge for us trying to create that as a program. So glad that we're past, at least the production of it, and of course, moving forward, tweak it as we need to.
Because that advisory board can certainly provide so much information, even at the beginning of this process, throughout the process, and even if you were a program not seeking accreditation, having an advisory board certainly adds to the quality of your program. And so definitely getting word from your advisory board, external stakeholders would be efficient.
And I'll just add, there's a bit of a disconnect in our field, at least I think, between what we're teaching in academia and maybe the field, because the field is so broad. So there's a lot of times where you teach a class, well, what do they really need to know? And you can try to guess, right? Or these external stakeholders, advisory board has been great for us. We asked some questions like, well, what are graduates not really realizing? What do you think is actually the most important part of your job? The people, actually, the practitioners, kind of can help guide your curriculum and your assessment. So it's super, super useful for us.
Yeah. And to kind of piggyback on that, part of our internship final supervisor evaluation has those questions on it regarding, what type of, Joe has a specialty in the legal side of sport. So, what are our students coming out of their full program with experience in legal side of sport? And sometimes we'll get that feedback from those internship supervisors and realize, well, they didn't really have a lot in college athletics or recreational sports or, whatever. So that is one of our assessments, and an indirect assessment, but able to provide us that feedback so that moving forward in the classroom, we can maybe, touch on those things more. So it is that whole closing the loop thing it's really come to make sense now as we've gone through the process.
And that's such an important component of not only accreditation, but the quality of your program. I mean, we've certainly learned so much through this process and how to actually make our program better. And it is important to be able to reflect on things like closing the loop. And so we'll talk about that again in a moment. Sorry, we're advancing slides. We're used to using Google Meets at our college, so we're fish out of water here with Zoom. So as you all know, and especially since most of you have already gone through this process, of course, the outcomes assessment plan can be pretty daunting, and there are a lot of components to it. And in addition to creating the strategic priorities, it's developing a really sound program mission, because everything that you do as a program kind of goes back to your mission statement. Why do we serve? What functions are we serving, and things like that. So in any kind of decision, you always take it back to your mission. So it's important to kind of establish a quality program mission from the outset. And then the learning goals, the broad-based goals, and then under the umbrella of that, certainly your learning, operational, and program level student learning outcomes. It's basically, you want to think And you don't have to make it more complicated than it is. It's what do you want your students to know when they graduate from your program? What skills do you want them to have when they go out and get a job and they have the seal of your university on them? What do you want to see them areas be competent in? And so that certainly drives the mission of your goals. And of course, as Joe was saying, our program, you know, while it's a specific major, it's a very diversified type program. So it can be hard to streamline it in terms of making these goals, because you have certain goals for, say, a marketing class, very different goals for a media class. And, you know, so it's looking at the whole picture and just establishing what you want them to know upon leaving your program. And so, and then of course,
yeah, all of your student learning out, the measures, your goals for operational effectiveness, and then those measures, you know, and just going back to all those, what are those basic skills that you want your, you know, your students to have and be able to go out into this particular field. And, you know, like Ashley said, having that seal of your university, but also knowing that they're capable and competent going out into that field. So, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, and certainly one of the things that we've learned through the process is ours originally was a very complicated plan with many goals, and we were trying to include, you know, lots of classes and whatnot. And one of the greatest pieces of advice that we've received from our mentor is how to most effectively streamline the process. You don't have to assess every single thing, every component that you do in your program. You can have one course with an assessment, you know, that crosses across many goals. And that's been helpful to us. And just kind of like creating a very nice focus for what we're doing helps for us to see things much clearer. And not everything that you assess needs to be a part of your grading system. And so that's something else that we learned through the process as well, in terms of streamlining what we do.
Anybody have any questions before we move forward? I click here. Oh, here we go. Oh, thanks, Heather. Okay.
Oops, sorry again.
There we go.
Zoom thing. Okay, so while everything kind of goes back to the mission, not to kind of, you know, bore y'all with little specifics here, but because the mission is really the foundation of your program, we just wanted to share what our mission was. And our program is to prepare students with knowledge and skills to become versatile, independent, and creative learners. Having the opportunity to engage in a variety of instructional strategies and endeavors to develop their critical thinking and problem-solving skills requisite for the global sport industry. So it's like, wow, that's quite a bit. Like if your alumni can actually be these things, that would be awesome. And so everything that we do in terms of assessments that we make or decisions that we make, is this enhancing our program mission? Is it, you know, is this going to help our students be more independent thinkers? Are they going to be able to compete in a global sport industry? And, you know, and certainly all those critical problem solving skills. And we really focus on being real world ready and doing hands-on things to give them the practical skills that they need to be successful in the sport industry. And so it all goes back to this program mission. So
just to chime in a little bit here, I have a tendency to get lost in details a lot. I can't see the forest because I'm staring at the trees too much. So while, you know, some people may think mission statements, like what's the point, they're corny, for someone like me, it's really useful to kind of pull me back out and remember that, especially when you're doing something like assessment, where you really feel like you're getting down into the weeds, you have a tendency to just start doing stuff, and you really need to, the mission is a good way to pull yourself back and say, well, is this really productive for what we're overall trying to do, or are we just getting nitpicky right now? So it's been super useful for especially, I'm the most junior faculty member here. So things like this are very helpful to help me get going.
All right.
Okay. So, and Heather, feel free to jump in if, because we certainly don't want any, indiscrepancies in this kind of thing. You can get bogged down in a lot of, what's the difference in a learning and an operating program level student learning outcome. Basically, the crux of that is making sure that whatever you set out, that you can measure it in some way, that it can be measured. If it's, you want your students to be more, have more industry experience, well, you need to have a tool to measure that. So you can go back and see if you're being effective and whatnot. So while this stuff can get kind of mind boggling, it's asking yourself, okay, from the mission and then with your goals, making sure that the things that you do, you can go back and measure the student and program progress.
And so, on that note, if you've all done accreditation, which it seems like a lot of you have already done, or maybe just starting, but those direct and indirect measures, making sure that you understand that your direct measures should assess actual samples of your students' work. So like, for example, in some of our assessments, which some of these have changed, just having, a mentor now to help us streamline our assessment plan. But we, in a marketing class, we have a marketing plan. So it's an actual sample of student work to see, if they were able to understand what's being taught, or even a comprehensive exam. Whereas your indirect is we're going to imply that the student has learned by some form of like self-reported data. So for us, we do a graduate survey of all of our graduates. We have an alumni survey that we get feedback from. And then every intern has a full final supervisor evaluation in which we assess some of that information, like what basic knowledge did they have to use in this real world experience on sociological issues in sport, legal aspects of sport, finance and budget, and all of those things that we're trying to see as an outcome from our program. So understanding those differences between direct and indirect, and obviously making sure that you have the right amount that Cosmo requires for each student learning outcome. So there's that. Here are a few examples of our, an example of a direct and an example of an indirect. So in our sport law class, it's actually, our class is set up where it's ethics and legal aspects of sport. So we do an ethical debate. So this would be a direct measure. We would be able to see a sample of a student's response to an ethical dilemma, an issue to debate. And then on the, I guess is it the right side of your screen? I'm not sure. The one that's the indirect, yeah, is going to be the final supervisor evaluation that we use. And this is only the first page, but I keep skipping it.
If you click the one that's just one square, it'll turn them into one square.
No, yeah,
Sure, that one maybe.
Okay. Now this is just the first page, like I said, but once again, each supervisor is filling this out. They're sending this back to us, giving us that feedback on how our students have performed in these areas. And I think on page 2 and 3, that's where we kind of get specific about what sociological knowledge and what legal knowledge do they have based on how they've performed at their particular site.
Yes. And so with operational effectiveness goals, these are the goals of your program. And again, think about what you want to achieve as your program. These are things like the number of faculty that you have, or tracking, how many graduates you have, and things like that. Certainly things you do with your student organizations. How about faculty evaluations, identifying significant alumni, and then also faculty goals, etc. So all of those factor into your operational effectiveness goals. And just as it's important to have goals and measures for your classes, it's equally as important to have goals and measures for the program as a whole, certainly. And again, make sure that you have a very identifiable benchmark. So if, let's say you want your student organization to be more involved. Well, how do you want them to be more involved? How are you going to measure that? Are you going to measure being more involved by how many community events they put on or fundraisers? Well, that needs to be written down so you can identify your benchmark and so you can go back and measure it appropriately. And so, again, and not to say that ours is perfect by any means, whatnot, but just some things that we do at the program level in terms of our operational effectiveness goals. As you can see, with the first one is just evaluating our program. Our students, they all take a senior exit survey. Well, what is the overall rating score? What do we want it to be as a program when they graduate? Do we want our alumni to rate our program favorably? And so we have a score, 75%. So we can clearly look at the surveys and we can measure clearly, hey, our cohorts of students are rating us favorably according to our benchmark. Things with regard to having an advisory board. How are you going to measure having an advisory board? You want to have an evaluation of your program, and you know that that's important, but how are you going to measure that? Well, for us, it's having favorable quality assessments. What is a favorable quality assessment? Well, having open-ended feedback that we could develop into themes so we can see what their assessment was, for example. And not to go through each and every one of these, but certainly providing practical experience for all our core sport management courses that encompass sport marketing, sport law and ethics, certainly sport governance, sport administration, sport facility and event management. And we, again, to kind of go coincide with our university mission of being real world ready, we want to make sure that we have at least one practical experience in each of our core sport management courses. That could be in the form of a marketing plan or a community event or a fundraiser, but we can clearly look back and ascertain if we have provided that in each one of our plans. So the key here with operational effectiveness goals is there's no clear, there's no set path for you to make yours. It's what you deem to be important to your program, but whatever it is, you have to make sure that you can clearly go back and measure it through a quality benchmark.
And just a side note here, you'll notice you can't only see this first page, but following each of our operational effectiveness goals, we've now added a dedicated resource allocation for each goal. And this really was something that our mentor helped us to see that maybe we had not fully executed, I guess, in the plan, but knew how we were going to handle it. But she recommended, that we add that to each one of our operational effectiveness goals in order to show how we were going to make this happen, whether it included a budget item or a certain faculty member to accomplish those goals. And so that was really helpful, I think, for us to see each goal and how we were going to allocate for that to see the fruition of it. So that was unique. We did add this particular row to each goal in order to see. So I see that we have something in the chat. Okay, thanks, Christy, for coming. Thanks, Heather. Yeah, we thought it was a great idea too, and so we're pleased to be moving forward with that. It'll really help us to kind of see it all come through.
Okay. And then here we go to really arguably the most important thing that we do in academia as we close the loop on our program. So you want to make sure that all the pieces of your program align together in terms of defining your student learning outcomes, just your operational effectiveness goals, taking a look at your assessments. How is your program doing? How are your students doing? Being able to properly analyze the results, and ultimately how are you going to take action? What are you going to do to make improvements? How are you going to use the information that you find? And so that's the most important thing, is how are we going to implement what we find on an annual basis. And so doing the annual reports is certainly very helpful in helping to close the loop. And so.
And the assessment program that our university uses, and I guess most of them might do this, but it gives you the opportunity to put in an action plan for each goal, outcome, or measure that you have not met. And whether it was partially met or not met, they want you to put in some form of action plan. And so that really does help, to kind of pull it all together and realize, okay, this was done well, this wasn't, how are we going to correct that moving forward? Okay, thanks, James, for coming.
Yeah, thank you, James.
Okay, so I guess open to any questions and answers. Obviously, that was just kind of a brief run through, and some of the experiences that along the way we have picked up and learned. And
yeah,
forward.
So some things that could potentially be helpful.
Just bring us back to that.
Okay, there we go.
Things that could be helpful.
Yeah, the one person that has not yet gone through the process was James Whitaker.
Oh,
Okay.
But he got it all, it sounds like, so that's good.
Yeah, good. That's good.
Everyone else is very well versed.
Okay.
Well, I have a quick question though, because this is recorded, so I thought it'd be cool if you could kind of going back to what you talked about, the streamlining process. I know you guys worked with a mentor, which is great, but then choosing like the different classes and the direct and indirect measurements. So can you kind of just really briefly, because we don't have too much time, but just kind of talk about that streamlining process for people who will listen to this later?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah. So one of the things that we realized is that we had a very heavy outcomes assessment plan. And I guess I used the word heavy, but we were assessing something in almost every single sport management course that we provided.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things our mentor suggested was, we really want some stronger, more valid assessments, but it might not be in every course. And it might be one assessment in one course, but we're going to measure it in 5 different ways. And so that process to us, I mean, and we, still aligning with COSMA's principles and what their expectations are. Like she said, we needed to have a thorough discussion of what we wanted our intended outcomes to be. And that once we revisited that we needed more valid assessments rather than trying to spread us so thin across the program. So I guess in streamlining it, we really did sit down and discuss, like, this is where our priorities are. And so we had an assessment in our intro class that really they didn't quite understand it. They're new to the program. It just really was not a valid, strong assessment that we needed in that particular course. So we sort of altered the assessment and put it in one of our upper level Sportman courses. So I guess that was what, I think she helped us to understand, like, we wanted more meaningful feedback. We didn't just need a ton of feedback. We wanted it to be more meaningful. So, yeah.
And another example of how we implemented that is we teach a social issues course. It's a junior level class, and we have a project where they do a sociological assessment of a sport related event. And so we use that one project, and with many measures, like we measure how they respond to sporting behaviors, or how they assess sporting behaviors, how they assess race and ethnicity, how they assess gender, social class, for example. So that one project can be spread across the board in looking at many measures. Whereas before, we just had this one project clumped into one measure, and it was really hard to say, okay, are our students really getting this aspect of it or this aspect? We can see it much better with what our students are getting and not getting. Yeah. So.
All right. Did you need any more information? I'm willing. Thank you. Yeah, I have to say, the mentor process has been very beneficial for us. It was just a really great way to kind of stand back and look in at your program and have somebody else say, y'all are doing this really well. But would you rather get this more meaningful feedback? And it's like, well, yeah, we absolutely would. And so just kind of guiding us and helping us figure out how we should do that. And so that was very beneficial for us.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I really appreciate you doing this so that I don't have to do it. Thank
Well,
you.
Heather, we always have to say thank you to you.
Yes.
Because you are, I mean, you're the rock of this whole thing, and appreciate all of the support that you've given us throughout the years, and, being patient.
Yes.
with our-
Welcome. It's complicated as you have articulated, and it's what you want it to be too within the parameters. So that means there are infinite number of choices. So it's really tough. It's definitely tough.
Yep.
Well, we certainly appreciate you, and you even, coming to this session as well as others. We appreciate you being here. And if y'all have any
Still
questions or
busy.
comments, feel free to contact us.